University in 1909, he takes his first job with the U.S. Forest Service in Arizona and New Mexico. And his journals start to take on a very different character now. They are no longer just about the pleasure of the search. Now, when he's out on the national forest land, his journals are full of observations, but he's well aware that he is going to have to go back to his journals and get information from the journals to write his reports about the condition of the forest and so on. So for the first time, Leopold is actually now making the transition of trying to find order and meaning in his observations in the field. He's treating his observations essentially as data that he will go back and analyze. Well, he does this throughout the rest of his life, and as you probably know, in mid-career he does return to the Midwest and eventually takes the job at the University of Wisconsin and acquires the shack. And the shack becomes the focal point of some of Leopold's most meticulous observations of the natural world. He and his family visited the shack on weekends and holidays, and when they were there, they kept detailed journals of the things that they were observing. And once again, this was all about the pleasure of the search. This was just a very fun thing to do. The Leopold family treated it almost as a competition to see who could find the first flower or the first bird arriving, and so on. And of course, for those of you who have read a Sand County Almanac, you know that the first half of the book is taken directly from all the Leopold's shack journals. All of those seasonal essays reflect observations that Leopold and his family were making at the shack. And although those essays are, of course, very skillfully constructed, if you read between the lines, you realize that they have a phenological basis. Obviously, they are arranged month by month, but sort of laid between the lines, Leopold reveals his phenological habit. So, for example, for the month of July, the iconic species for the month is the compass plant that Leopold wrote about in the essay Prairie Birthday. And he writes about this little graveyard along Highway 12 that he passes in driving up to the shack, and the fact that he found a compass plant growing in the corner of this graveyard. And he, of course, writes very eloquently about the loss of the prairie. But if you realize, if you read carefully, sort of laid in between the lines is the last sentence that I've extracted here. This year I found the Sylvium in first bloom on 24 July, a week later than usual. During the last 6 years, the average date was 15 July. Now that's a really important indication that Leopold has gone back to his journals and is now treating these observations as data. He's calculated the average. And to do that, he had to go back and extract the observations that he and his family had been making. So Leopold continues to do this. And here is a typical page from Aldo Leopold's shack journals. This one is particularly interesting. It's for the first week in May, which, if you keep phenological records, is one of the busiest weeks in the phenological year when more things are happening. But I also noted, when you look at the weather, 2 inches of snow on May 1st. So don't get too used to warm Marches. We do have snow in May. But in any event, if you go down, he's recording the weather and some observations about the river, but then he gets into the phenology section, and these are all of the things that he and his family were observing. And you'll notice that over some of these species of plants and animals, there's a little tick mark. And that little tick mark reveals that Leopold has gone back through these journals and he has extracted that observation as an important piece of data. He's putting a date on that particular event. And you'll notice that I've underlined here that the great crested flycatchers returned to the shack that first week in May. Remember that, because I'll come back to both the lilacs and the phoebes and the skunk cabbage and the crested flycatcher later in the lecture. So the tick marks indicate that Leopold was analyzing the data, And here's what the analysis looked like. This is a 1945 Excel spreadsheet. This is essentially looking at all of those observations that he took not only from his shack journals, but also from his graduate students. During his time at the University of Wisconsin, Aldo Leopold required his graduate students to keep phenological records on their study sites. And he was very upfront about why he had them do that. It was to prevent them from putting on blinders and only paying attention to the species that they were studying and not paying attention to all of the other things that were happening in the community. And he said the best way to make you aware of everything that's happening around you is to keep phenological records. Many of his students worked at the University of Wisconsin Arboretum. So when Leopold was doing this analysis, he combined his observations and his family's observations at the shack with the observations that his students were making of phenological events at the University of Wisconsin Arboretum.